People often hear about dower rights, but they don't necessarily understand it. Dower rights help a person who's married, where their spouse is on title, but they're not legally an owner of the property. They're not on title to the property. So what protects them to make sure that their spouse doesn't sell their home and they have nowhere to live? It's called the Dower Act. And in order to get around the Dower Act, then you need one of two things. Now, for dower to occur, we need one person on title, that person is legally married, and if either of those two people have lived in the property since the time of the marriage. So just to clarify, common law doesn't count. If you're not legally married, it doesn't count. Unless the legislation changes, that's it, just legally married people. And if either person has lived in the property, even if one person has slept overnight in the property, there are situations where that's deemed to be that they've lived in there. Now, it doesn't apply to a property that's always been a rental property, or you might have lived in it, got married, but moved into the new home as soon as you were married, then there's no dower rights on the existing property, and the person on title can sell it at their whim. In terms of selling it, they have to get permission from their spouse, as I've said, and that's done in one of two ways. Either a dower release, so the spouse says, I forever release my dower rights in this property. It gets registered on title to the property, so the whole world can see that the spouse who's not on title has no claim to or interest in the property. And it's good to note that those dower releases can be revoked. So even though it's there, they can be removed, but it's just there for convenience. The other option is for a consent of spouse. And a consent of spouse allows for one document to be registered at land titles. So we've talked about a transfer where you change ownership, but this could also be granting a mortgage to a bank. So if a bank has a mortgage on the property and you don't make payments, they can foreclose and take the house away. So the spouse on title is giving away an interest in the land, an interest in the property. So they need their spouse's consent. If a spouse consents to a mortgage on the property, that document doesn't let them then sell the property. It doesn't let them get another mortgage down the road. It's just for a very specific transaction. There's some quirky little loops in the law where, if a spouse wants to give their spouse who's not on title half the home, the spouse who's not on title still has to consent to their spouse disposing of the interest, even though it's coming to them. So there's little kind of nuances in that. If you have questions, make sure you reach out. And do not ever lie if there's on an affidavit with respect to dower, because the consequences are huge. You want to talk to your lawyer, just know, never lie about dower rights. It's going to be far worse than family law repercussions or anything else. It's very strongly worded to protect the spouse who's not on title. That concept of dower, remember, is different than equitable rights. It has nothing to do with the money in the property. It's just a law that protects a person to make sure they have somewhere to live if in future situations down the road with their spouse.